Richard Harrington was the kind of man who believed he could control everything: people, fate, even time itself. A respected millionaire, owner of one of the most imposing mansions in Cape Cod, surrounded by luxury and silence. On the surface, his life seemed perfect, but a closer look revealed the cracks. Behind the flawless walls was an empty home, and behind the dozens of cameras installed in every room, there was a father who watched everything, except what truly mattered. On the eve of the traditional Halloween party, Richard decided to upgrade the mansion's security system. He wanted everything to be flawless. After all, it was the only tradition he had kept alive since his wife's death. But what he didn't know was that those cameras would capture more than just the party preparations. They would record something no father is ever ready to see. Something that can't be bought, erased, or forgotten. While guests prepared for the most luxurious event of the year, Richard spent his nights re-watching footage of his own house. Between images of costumes and decorations, one detail caught his attention. His son, alone in the garden, talking to someone who wasn't there anymore. At first, he thought it was imagination, but soon realized he was about to witness the moment that would change his life forever. Reddish leaves covered the vast lawn of the Harrington estate in Cape Cod, dancing under the cold October wind. The mansion seemed to breathe tradition and silence, with its white columns resembling a museum more than a home. Richard Harrington, dressed in an impeccable suit and with tired eyes, watched everything from the balcony of his second-floor office. Down below, technicians adjusted cables, sensors, and cameras at the corners of the property. He had ordered the new system, claiming it was for the family's grand Halloween party. But deep down, what he truly sought was control. Control of his surroundings, of people, and perhaps, without admitting it, of his own emptiness. The annual event was famous among Boston's elite. Politicians, businessmen, journalists, all awaited the invitation from the widowed millionaire who kept alive the tradition of his late wife, Evelyn Harrington. But since her death, the celebration had become a cold, mechanical routine. Decorators had replaced her loving hands. Genuine smiles were lost amid commitments and protocol. The only one who still seemed to care was Nathan, their 10-year-old son, who curiously followed the garden preparations. He was fascinated by the carved pumpkins, the twinkling lights, the sweet aroma drifting from the kitchen, everything that still carried traces of the original magic of that day. Richard, however, saw the boy only through screens. He had installed cameras in every room, an exaggeration even by security standards. From his office, he monitored every movement of the staff, and occasionally, his sons. On one of the screens, he saw Nathan helping a technician hang a fake spider web. The boy smiled proudly at the result, but instead of going down to praise him, Richard merely adjusted the camera angle to see him better. It was easier to watch than to participate. When Grace Miller, the housemaid, appeared in the frame, the atmosphere seemed to change. Young, patient, and with a rare serenity, she approached Nathan and invited him to test the garden lanterns. The two walked under the setting sun, and for the first time in months, Richard felt something stir inside him. He watched in silence, unsure whether it was envy, nostalgia, or guilt. The sound of their laughter didn't reach his office. Only the image, the boy running between glowing pumpkins and the maid smiling as if time had stopped. The millionaire looked away, pressing the button to switch to another camera. It was easier to ignore pain than to face it. That night, when the last technician left, Richard went down to the basement, where the control room was located. The wall of monitors displayed every corner of the mansion, pulsing with tiny colored lights that indicated movement. He ran his fingers over the console as if touching something sacred. The administrator presented reports about cloud storage, detection zones, and response times. Everything was perfect, except for one detail, a dead zone in the solarium where the signal didn't reach. Richard demanded it be fixed immediately. No blind spots would be tolerated. But what he didn't know was that the true blind spot of that house was within himself. The next morning, The upstairs floor was filled with laughter. Nathan's playroom was covered in scraps of paper, fabric, and colorful ribbons. He and Grace were preparing his costume for the party. The boy wanted to be a ghost, just like Mom taught me, he said, showing a white sheet that had been kept for years in a box of memories. Grace smiled at that and helped him adjust the cloth to the right size. She fastened it with small pins, cut the holes for the eyes, and added an old candle-shaped brooch the boy had found among his mother's belongings. She wore this brooch on her last Halloween, he explained, his eyes glowing with nostalgia. Grace pinned it to the sheet, right over his heart. Richard watched it all from the monitor. The footage showed the boy spinning, wrapped in the sheet, while Grace laughed. That image awakened long-buried memories. Evelyn running through the halls pretending to be a ghost to scare him. It was a laugh that still echoed somewhere in his mind. He pressed his lips together, forcing the memory away, but the muffled laughter from the camera pierced him like an invisible needle. Why her? He thought. Why can she make him smile and I can't? Later, in the garden, Grace and Nathan tested the costume under the pumpkin lights. The air was cold and damp, and their breath formed little clouds. If you could talk to your mom today, what would you tell her? Grace asked softly. Nathan looked down and said, I'd ask her to teach Dad how to stay close. Grace swallowed hard and simply nodded, while Richard, watching from the cameras, felt his heartbeat falter. For a moment, he considered turning off the system. But he didn't. It was like watching a movie about his own guilt. That evening, Grace taught Nathan how to bake leaf-shaped cookies. The smell of cinnamon and sugar filled the kitchen. The boy laughed every time the dough cracked, and she would say they were leaves bitten by hungry ghosts. When Richard appeared at the doorway, the two went silent. Grace invited him to try the first batch, but he declined, saying he had work. He climbed the stairs without noticing his son's disappointed look, nor Grace's quiet sigh. Hours later, the house was asleep. In his office, Richard replayed the day's footage. Each screen showed a corner of the mansion, empty corridors, windows trembling with the wind, the dark garden glowing with pumpkin lanterns. He paused the video on the moment Nathan talked about staying close. He rewound, watched again, and again. The boy's face, half hidden beneath the sheet, looked like Evelyn's. For a fleeting moment, the millionaire allowed himself to cry, but only for a few seconds. He quickly wiped his face, took a deep breath, and turned off the system. The sound of the click echoed in the silence. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. The mansion felt alive, watching him, as if passing judgment. The next morning began with the sound of hammers and hurried voices. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the Harrington mansion, illuminating the movement of decorators and assistants. Boxes were scattered everywhere, filled with fake webs, electric candles, plaster skulls, and black fabrics. The Halloween party, a family tradition, would be as grand as ever, at least on paper. Richard walked through the hallways supervising every detail, clipboard in hand, his expression a mix of tension and impatience. The event had become more of a display of status than a celebration. Nothing there carried the spontaneous glow of Evelyn's time. As he barked orders about the placement of lights in the evening schedule, Nathan watched from afar, sitting on the main staircase. The boy clutched the folded white sheet and the silver brooch pinned to its edge. From time to time, he cast a hopeful glance toward his father, who passed by as if he were just another employee. Grace noticed and approached, kneeling beside the boy. "Would you like to make something of your own for the party?" she asked with a smile. Nathan nodded, and her eyes lit up. "Then let's create our own special corner." They gathered a few candles, old photos, and a small pumpkin, and headed to the side hall, one of the few places Richard hadn't yet filled with decorations. There, Grace helped Nathan set up a small tribute to his mother. They placed a photo of Evelyn smiling, surrounded by dried leaves and orange ribbons. Nathan lit a candle and murmured something Grace couldn't quite understand, but she knew it was a prayer. When they finished, the space felt different, warmer, more alive. Grace brushed the boy's hair and said softly, "I think she would have loved this." Nathan smiled and replied, "I think she's here." The corridor cameras captured the moment, and later when Richard reviewed the footage, he froze before the screen. He couldn't look away. The image of his son standing before his wife's photo struck him like a blow, as if a piece of the past had come back to demand a debt he pretended didn't exist. That night, the millionaire was still awake, leaning over the main monitor. The day's recordings played in silence, showing Grace and Nathan in small gestures that seemed simple but carried the kind of affection long gone from that house. Richard zoomed in on Nathan's face. For an instant, he saw Evelyn reflected in the boy's eyes, the same gentle expression, the same attentive gaze. A feeling of loss mixed with envy. Why could Grace make the boy smile when he couldn't? His fist tightened on the desk. The lights flickered softly on the screens, and the cold reflection of his own image stared back. For the first time, Richard felt like a stranger inside his own home. It was past midnight when Richard awoke to the sound of wind beating against the windows. He went down to his office, unable to sleep. The house was dark, and the branches scratching against the glass created an almost ghostly atmosphere. On the main monitor, the cameras flickered in shades of blue. On impulse, he clicked on the garden footage. The image showed Nathan and Grace walking among the glowing pumpkins, speaking in low voices. Richard turned up the volume. The audio crackled before stabilizing, revealing the conversation that would change everything. "Do you think she can still hear me?" Nathan asked, looking up at the sky. "Of course she can," Grace replied. "The people we love never really disappear. They just find a different way to stay close." The boy smiled, a small, sincere smile, and added, "I wish she'd teach Dad how to smile again." Richard froze. For several seconds, time seemed to stop. The still image of his son before the pumpkins, lit by trembling lights, wounded him in a way no harsh truth ever could. He muted the audio and kept staring at the screen as if it were a living painting. He tried to rationalize, to tell himself it was just a child's talk, an innocent fantasy. But what he felt was shame. Not of the child, nor of Grace, but of himself. For the first time, he realized how invisible he had become in his own son's eyes. The next morning, he summoned Grace to his office. The woman entered calmly, though her cautious gaze betrayed that she knew why she'd been called. "I watched yesterday's recordings," Richard began, his tone icy. "I don't think it's appropriate for you to talk to my son about that sort of thing." Grace took a deep breath, maintaining her composure. "With all due respect, Mr. Harrington, I only answered what he asked. He misses his mother, and you don't talk to him about it." The response caught him off guard. "That's none of your concern," he snapped. "It is," she replied softly. "Because you pay me to care for him. And caring also means listening." The phrase hung in the air like a sentence. Richard dismissed her with an irritated wave, but when she left, the house felt even quieter. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, feeling a pressure in his chest that didn't come from anger. It was something deeper. Racked with guilt, he climbed the stairs to his son's room and found Nathan asleep. Moonlight slipped through the curtains, illuminating the folded white sheet on the chair. The candle-shaped brooch gleamed faintly, reflecting the light. Richard approached and touched it. It was cold, metallic, yet it seemed to pulse with life. Back in the office, he sat once more before the screens. He spent hours re-watching the footage of the house. The empty hall, the silent garden, the corridors full of shadows. Then he paused on the image of Nathan laughing with Grace, and something inside him broke. Evelyn used to laugh like that too. The same sound, the same gesture. Richard lowered his head, and for the first time in years, he let the tears fall freely. The cameras kept recording indifferent, capturing the man who finally saw himself, and didn't like what he saw. The next morning, the sky hung gray over Cape Cod, and a cutting wind carried the scent of the sea. Richard's mood matched the weather. He had spent the night awake, replaying every word Grace had said the day before. Caring also means listening. That phrase echoed in his head like an irritating refrain, transforming into something he could no longer silence. When he came down for breakfast, he found Nathan sitting at the table, drawing on a napkin with crayons. Grace served pancakes and hot chocolate, smiling as the boy excitedly talked about the party decorations. The scene, so simple, so domestic, unsettled him. Richard cleared his throat, and the atmosphere froze. "Nathan, go finish getting ready. I need to speak with Miss Miller." His cold tone made clear that nothing pleasant would follow. As soon as the boy left the room, Richard stepped closer. "Let's make something clear, Grace. You're here to take care of the house, not to invade my role as a father." She remained calm, though her eyes held firm resolve. "With all due respect, Mr. Harrington, you abandoned that role a long time ago." He frowned. "Are you saying I don't know how to care for my own son?" "I'm saying that caring isn't just paying for food and shelter. It's being present, listening, loving." Grace's words cut through Richard like glass. He tried to argue but couldn't find anything that made sense. Everything she said was true, and he knew it. "You live surrounded by cameras, but you don't see a thing," she added before collecting the plates and leaving the room, leaving him alone. The silence that followed was deafening. Later, Richard went to his office and played back the kitchen footage. He re-watched the scene of their conversation, now from the outside, as if observing a stranger arguing with the only person brave enough to tell him the truth. Shame crept in. He had lost control of his home, but worse, he had lost his son to a void of his own making. Desperate to regain control, Richard decided to double-check the security system himself. He increased the volume, monitoring every movement in the house as if searching for a technical fault to justify his unease. But what he found was his own reflection, a lonely man inside a mansion full of echoes. That night, he heard footsteps in the corridor. It was Nathan, holding the white sheet of his costume. "Dad?" the boy asked hesitantly. Richard took a moment to respond. "It's late, son. Go to bed." Nathan lowered his head and obeyed, dropping the sheet to the floor. The candle brooch gleamed briefly before fading into the shadows. When Richard bent down to pick it up, he noticed the small object was broken, the chain loose, the metal cold. He held it in his palm, feeling a sting of guilt pierce through his rigid posture. Suddenly, Evelyn's image came to mind, smiling, with the same eyes as Nathan's. It was the first time Richard felt fear, not of what he saw on the cameras, but of what he saw within himself. The wind howled outside, and the rattle of the windows blended with the distant roar of the sea. The mansion slept, but Richard was awake, seated before the screens. The clock struck 2 in the morning when, not quite knowing why, he opened the files from his son's bedroom. The image appeared in black and white, and for a moment he thought it was old footage. But it was live. Nathan was on the floor, wrapped in the white sheet of his costume, with a lit candle on the rug. The flicker cast delicate shadows across his face. Richard raised the volume. The boy was speaking to himself in a whisper. "Mom, take care of Dad." He forgot how to smile. Richard went still. His son's words cut through the air like a blade. For a few seconds he forgot to breathe. The image felt distant, unreal, as if he were watching a dream. But it was real, and every syllable from the boy's mouth stripped him of any defense. His trembling hand reached for the pause button, but he couldn't press it. At last he stood and went to his son's room. He opened the door slowly, trying not to make a sound. Nathan was asleep, the sheet still over him, the candle snuffed out. The candle-shaped brooch lay on the dresser, repaired. Grace must have fixed it. Richard stepped closer and picked it up, watching the moon's faint reflection on the metal. It was like holding a fragment of the past. He sat on the edge of the bed and ran a hesitant hand through the boy's hair. It had been so long since he'd touched him with tenderness that the gesture felt foreign. "I'm sorry, son," he whispered, but Nathan didn't hear. He slept peacefully, and perhaps it was better that way. Back in the office, Richard watched the recording again. The kneeling boy, the lit candle, the simple, sincere plea. For the first time, he understood that the cameras didn't exist to protect him. They existed to remind him of what he had lost. He spent the whole night replaying the scene, and with each repetition, he felt his heart crack a little more. When the sun began to rise, he shut down the system. The mansion sank into a different kind of silence, a human, imperfect one. Richard looked around and realized that without the cold glow of the screens, the house felt bigger, more alive. Maybe that was what Evelyn had been trying to teach all along. No security in the world can replace a true gaze. As the first ray of sunlight crossed the window, he stood up, resolute. The Halloween party would be held that night, and for the first time, he wanted to take part, not as a host, but as a father. The Harrington mansion had never been so alive, nor so empty. The late afternoon of October 31st brought with it the Atlantic chill and a parade of luxury cars stopping at the main gate. With each arrival, the air filled with forced laughter, expensive perfumes, and lavish disguises. The grand hall glittered beneath golden chandeliers, and the marble floor reflected dukes, vampires, and otherworldly creatures. It was Boston High Society's Halloween, a spectacle of vanity where no one knew who they really were. Richard descended the stairs with a rehearsed smile, wearing a dark suit and a silver Venetian mask. He greeted the guests with the ease of someone who had mastered the theater of appearances. "Incredible how you managed to keep this tradition alive," a businessman praised beside him. "Yes," Richard answered. "Evelyn loved this party." But his voice sounded distant, almost automatic. Deep down, every detail of the celebration, every burst of laughter, every camera flash, felt like a silent affront. Meanwhile, in the side wing, Grace and Nathan watched the commotion discreetly. The boy, in his ghost costume, seemed out of place among the opulent guests. Even so, his eyes shone at the sight of the lights and the decorations he had helped set up. "Do you want to go over there?" Grace asked. "No," he replied. "I'd rather stay here." Mom didn't like crowds much. She smiled, proud of the little one, and knelt beside him. "I think she's happy you did this." From the mezzanine, Richard saw them. Two simple figures amid the ostentation, the son and the woman who, without knowing it, were teaching him how to feel again. Something shifted inside him. For the first time, the mask on his face felt heavy. He squeezed the whiskey glass between his fingers, trying to hold back his anger at himself. While the guests toasted his fortune, he felt poorer by the minute. When the orchestra began to play, Richard walked down the lateral corridor. The laughter and music faded behind him until he reached the small altar Nathan and Grace had set up days earlier. The candle was still burning. Next to Evelyn's photo there was now a new image, a printed photo of Nathan with Grace in the garden, laughing as they set up the pumpkins. Richard touched the frame and swallowed the knot rising in his throat. That simplicity hurt more than any luxury could ever heal. Back in the hall, a guest called him to the makeshift stage for a toast. Richard climbed up, looked over the masked crowd, and for the first time in years, didn't know what to say. The words vanished. He saw his son's eyes among the people, the little ghost watching his father with curiosity and fear. And that was when something inside him finally broke. Without thinking, Richard signaled to the sound technician. "Turn off the lights." The laughter died, murmurs swelled. The hall plunged into dimness. Everyone turned to the central screen, expecting a welcome video like in previous years. But this time there would be no special effects or empty speeches. What appeared was a home recording, grainy footage of the garden at night. Nathan, dressed as a ghost, kneeling before a candle. His voice rang out clear, shattering the room's silence. "Mom, take care of Dad." He forgot how to smile. A shiver ran through the hall. A few women raised their hands to their mouths. Grace at the back stood motionless. Richard watched it all from the floor, making no effort to hide his face. Tears began to fall, slow, as the video continued to show the boy and the maid laughing among the pumpkins. "Is this real?" someone whispered. Richard didn't answer. When the video ended, the lights came back on, revealing the man everyone knew, now stripped of every mask. He drew a breath and took the microphone. His voice came out hoarse but steady. "For years, I threw this party to prove nothing had changed. To hide the fact that I lost my wife, and then my son. I filled this house with cameras thinking I could control everything, but I ended up blind to what truly mattered." The silence was absolute. "Tonight, these images showed me something money will never buy. The love I let die. And I don't want to live like that for even one more day." He set the microphone down and stepped off the stage. No one moved. Grace watched him with tears in her eyes, and Nathan, frightened, ran toward the door. Richard saw him flee and followed, ignoring the guests' confused stares. The cameras were still rolling, but for the first time, he didn't care. Outside, the wind blew hard. The lanterns swayed, casting ghostly shadows across the mansion walls. Richard hurried down the empty corridor, calling for his son. With each step he felt lighter and more vulnerable, as if finally shedding the weight of years of guilt. In the garden, he found the white sheet abandoned on the ground. In the distance, a small candle still burned on the improvised altar. He looked up at the starry Cape Cod sky and murmured, "Evelyn, I'm trying." And for the first time in a long while, he felt that maybe she could hear him. Richard crossed the garden, still calling his son's name. Dry leaves cracked beneath his shoes, the cold wind swept through the night, and the distant echo of party music mingled with the sounds of the dark. He stepped back into the mansion, now partially unlit. The guests had dispersed, confused and silent. What had once been a display of grandeur had turned into a public confession. As he climbed the stairs, Richard noticed a faint light coming from the west wing. He followed it, heart pounding. Pushing the door open slowly, he found Evelyn's room, untouched, exactly as she had left it before she died. The air inside was different. Colder, heavier, as if time itself had stopped. In the corner, sitting on the floor and clutching the white sheet from his costume, was Nathan. The boy was crying softly, his face buried in his knees. Richard approached cautiously and knelt beside him. "Nathan," he said quietly. The boy looked up, startled. "I ruined the party," he murmured. "People were laughing at me." His father shook his head, voice trembling. "No, son. I'm the one who ruined everything. 4 years." Nathan frowned, confused. Richard took a deep breath, searching for words he had never known how to use. "I thought that if I controlled everything, nothing could hurt me again. But I ended up hurting you. And there's no camera, no security, no wealth that can fix that. Only me. And I want to try." The silence that followed was heavy and full of meaning. Slowly, the boy let go of the sheet and moved closer. Richard opened his arms, and the hug happened. Hesitant at first, then firm, necessary, freeing. The man who had spent years hiding behind monitors finally felt the real warmth of his son in his arms. He cried silently, resting his head on Nathan's hair, whispering, "I love you, son. Forgive me." Nathan hugged him tightly, voice breaking. "Mom used to say everyone can learn to smile again." Richard laughed through his tears. "Then I guess she was right." Grace appeared quietly at the door, watching. Her tearful eyes met Richard's, and she simply nodded before stepping away. For the first time he didn't feel judged, he felt understood. In that moment, the Harrington mansion no longer felt like a tomb of memories, but a home. The moonlight bathed the room in a soft glow, and Evelyn's portrait above the fireplace seemed to smile gently. A year later, the Harrington mansion was no longer the same. The cameras were gone, the guards dismissed, and the windows stood open, letting in the ocean breeze. Cape Cod seemed brighter, more alive. Autumn had returned with its golden leaves and the anticipation of a new Halloween, but this time, things were different. There were no luxury cars at the gate, no invitations sent to Boston's elite. The new party was simple, made for neighbors and children from the community. In the garden, pumpkins decorated by Nathan and the other kids dotted the grass. Grace helped in the kitchen, laughing with the little ones, while Richard strung lights in the yard, covered in paint and flour. The old millionaire was gone. In his place stood a man in plain clothes, laughing loudly, unafraid to look foolish. When Nathan appeared in his new costume, this time, a clumsy vampire, Richard pretended to be terrified, provoking laughter. "Now that really scared me," he said, and the boy ran to hug him. As night fell, the candles were lit. Children ran among the trees, and the air was filled with the smell of hot chocolate. Grace brought out a tray of cookies, and Richard, smiling, handed them to the guests. For a moment, he paused and looked around, the sound of laughter, the gentle music, the warmth of people around him. It was the first Halloween that truly felt alive since Evelyn's passing. Later, when everyone had gone home, Nathan placed a small candle on the window ledge. "It's for Mom to see," he said sweetly. Richard helped him light the flame and watched it flicker. "She'd be very proud of you," he said softly. Nathan smiled. "Of us, Dad. She'd be proud of us." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the moonlight reflected on the glass. Outside, the trees swayed gently in the wind. And for a fleeting instant, Richard felt Evelyn there, not as a ghost, but as a light presence, smiling, watching them in peace. Before turning off the lights, Nathan looked up at him and whispered, "Happy Halloween, Dad." Richard answered with the sincere smile his son had waited for so long. "Happy Halloween, son." The candle flame stayed lit until dawn, glowing in the mansion window, a symbol that, at last, home was home again. And that's how a man who thought he had everything discovered how much he was truly losing. Sometimes, life doesn't need to break us, it just needs to show us a reflection we no longer recognize. Richard realized that no fortune is worth the silence of a child, and that the greatest riches are those money can never buy. If this story touched you in any way, leave a like below. It helps the channel keep bringing stories that make us feel, think and reflect. Write in the comments what you would have done if you were in this father's place, and share this video with someone who needs to remember the value of love and presence. Oh, and if you're not subscribed yet, take a moment to do it now and hit the bell icon. That way, you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. Every week, we bring you new emotional tales with messages that linger in the heart. Thank you for watching until the end. And remember, time doesn't go back, but love can always begin again, if we choose to see it. See you in the next video.